welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, November 11th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with those two huge games that went on in the SEC this past weekend. We had Ole Miss get a huge win over Georgia, as well as Alabama go into Baton Rouge and get a huge win over LSU, and probably knock out LSU from the CFP race. Then we'll get into a little talk around the upsets and close calls all around the country. Obviously, the big one is Miami going down to Georgia Tech, and then we had Indiana barely escape against Michigan and Ann Arbor. Then we'll get into the Big 12. We'll jump into Colorado and BYU, two huge performances there. One, Colorado dominating Texas Tech for much of that game, started a little bit slow, but got into a groove late. And then you had BYU just barely escape, a Utah team that playing a little bit better football right about now. Then we'll get into the top 25. We'll get a little bit of a roundup of at least the top performances from that weekend, including feels like Texas is kind of finding their way back to that early season form we saw in Ann Arbor. Then we'll get into that Week 11 wrap up, and we'll get into Ohio State and Oregon just getting one step closer to that possible rematch in Indianapolis. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click the $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive, so utilize that if you will. And also gsmcspodcast.net, still up and running, does the exact same thing, so either one of those you'd like to use, please do. We can have a fun back and forth here. But let's jump into these first couple of games because we have a lot to get to. Let's go ahead and jump into these. We have Ole Miss just dominating Georgia in a lot of different ways, and we'll start there because this was pretty remarkable. This was probably the moment that Ole Miss fans have been waiting for quite some time, really. It felt like a moment where that program, where a lot of the different things that they've been trying to put into place for the last couple of years finally kind of came together, finally kind of all fell into the right position, and now you're in a place where the CFP is very much in reach. Obviously, got to win out the rest of the way, but there's very little to no chance that a 10-2 Ole Miss is going to be left out of that thing. So a huge win for them, and really, it was the D-line. It was absolutely incredible what they were able to do to this Georgia offensive line that has been a little bit up and down this year, not necessarily to the Georgia standard of things, but is still one of the better units in the entire country. So you got a D-line that obviously can compete with those elite groups on Ole Miss, and frankly, they really just went to work on them. It wasn't just competing, it was absolutely dominating them pretty much from start to finish. And then the big thing here was Ole Miss's ability to bounce back was really incredible. You know, they throw a pick on the third play of the game, Georgia comes down and scores really immediately, and Jackson Dart goes down, and you just have to figure it out. Austin Simmons did a great job on a 10-play touchdown drive, and then they kind of just took over. The drive chart for UGA in the second half was field goal to start, then they had a fumble on the Ole Miss 29-yard line, they had an interception on the Ole Miss 27-yard line, another fumble, and a turnover on down. So essentially 4 turnovers in the second half for Georgia. So absolute domination from this Ole Miss defense, and yeah, this Georgia offense still has the same issues that a lot of us felt like they had, and it really came to the surface in this one. So a lot of stuff that they're going to have to figure out, no doubt about that. But how Ole Miss was able to win, I think obviously that D-line was absolutely dominant. Georgia had 59 yards on 33 carries, and it was just they were all over them pretty much from start to finish. Nate Frazier got going a little bit early, but that was about it for the entire day. They had 5 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and when you look back at this offseason, that was where a lot of the energy was put. You had Walter Nolan come in. You had Princely Umanmielen come in. You had a lot of these really talented guys on that defensive front, and really just that front seven. You had Chris Paul Jr. You had so many different guys that came into this team, and has totally changed the physical nature of this team. They are an aggressor now. They are no longer the team that has to find different ways to beat you, has to score 55 points, has to do really special stuff on the offensive side of the ball. They scored 28 points today. It was not necessarily the prettiest day offensively for a lot of different reasons, and the reality is you have a defense now that can drag you to wins, can carry you to wins, and they give up 10 points to an offense that, even with all the mistakes, had been putting up 34 points a game. So it's an incredible performance. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you got enough from the run game. It was never going to be this dominant run game that totally won the game for you, but 134 yards, 36 carries, 3.7 yards per carry, it's not great. It's not necessarily perfect, but without Henry Parrish, without a lot of these elite running backs, That's pretty good. And it puts you in a really good position where you can possibly run the ball just a little bit more aggressively going forward. You can take a little bit of pressure off Jackson Dart, especially as he gets back from that injury. So there's a lot of things at play here for Ole Miss, and it feels like this entire game was just a kind of arrival for that fan base that had been waiting so long to really turn that next page, to really get over that hump. Felt like this was the moment where they really did that. And then no panic early. We talked about it. They picked off Jackson Dart to start the game on the third play, immediately drove down and scored. From that moment forward, they outscored Georgia 28-3, forced 3 turnovers and a turnover on downs. They were all over this team pretty much from start to finish, barring that little bit of a blip to start this game. So really remarkable performance from Ole Miss and puts them in a great position going forward. So where they go from here is just go ahead and win out. That's all you really have to do. And obviously, much more to it than that. But you do have a bye this upcoming week to let Jackson Dart get healthy, let Trey Harris get healthy, which is absolutely huge. And then you got at Florida, you got Mississippi State. You get through that Florida game, you're probably going to the CFP. Obviously, got to keep your on your P's and Q's in that Mississippi State game. But at the end of the day, you could be in that kind of crazy group that could be at 10-2, which we will likely get into tomorrow. And it's one of those things where you're not getting left out. With a win like this, you are not getting left out if you have all of the other things that you need if you win the next 2 games, obviously. So some things to handle, but they could be in Atlanta at the end of the day. Even if they don't get to Atlanta, they went out there in the CFP. For Georgia, you're officially on thin ice. Now, you went out. You're in the CFP, no doubt about that, and you could be in Atlanta as well. But at the end of the day, you do have Tennessee coming to town. Very good defense, maybe even a better defensive line than Ole Miss has. So it's going to be a fight. And then after Tennessee, you get that win. You have UMass and Georgia Tech to win it, or to finish it in Athens. So win those 2. You're at 10-2. You're in the mess of the SEC, but you're definitely in. With that schedule that they've played, a 10-2 Georgia is not getting left out of this thing. So feels like 2 teams that could be possibly re-meeting in the CFP, but as of right now, they are 2 teams that are just fighting the rest of the way. If they win out, I expect to see both those teams in the 12-team field, but Georgia's got some issues that if they don't figure out, they're going to go down next weekend and be totally out of this thing. Then you got Alabama, a huge win for Alabama, 42-13 over LSU at LSU, and they did the thing that I think a lot of Bama fans have been wanting to do for quite some time, which is just play murder ball. That's who they are. At their core, that is who Alabama is, and they had 48 carries, 311 yards, and 6 touchdowns on the ground. So they did exactly that. That is what Bama fans want to do. That is what they're going to be good at if they're going to win a national title, and man, were they good at it on Saturday. They were all over the place, and LSU has likely bowed out of the CFP race. Technically, they're still in the SEC title race, but they're not going to get there. I'm just going to be totally honest. There's too many teams, there's too much craziness, and too many tiebreakers for them to find their way there. But they joined South Carolina in those 3 lost teams in the conference, and I think we're finding out more and more that's pretty much the cut line in the SEC right now. So you drop below those 2 losses, you're probably in a good bit of trouble. And then really impressive stuff from this Bama back end. You know, it was a worry coming into this game that Nussmeier was going to be able to essentially just dice them up pretty much every which way from Tuesday. It was going to be able to push the ball downfield. Well, he averaged 5.7 yards per pass and only had 1 touchdown and a pair of picks. So this back end did their job. There's no doubt about that. And the defense overall is really finding themselves. They did get the bad news that Quay Robinson is going to be out for the rest of the year. A huge pass rusher on that team and something they're going to have to deal with. But overall, they've been absolutely incredible. They lost Keon Saab a couple of weeks ago. Bray Hubbard's been absolutely incredible. So they should be okay, but definitely something to watch down the stretch of the season. And this Bama team is scary. If they're running the ball that way, if Milroe's getting going the way that he was in this game, they can get to the SEC title. They can win that thing. They can get a bye, and they can be your national title winner. So a lot of things are going right for Bama right now, and it feels like the team that a lot of Bama fans missed early on in the season, well, feels like they've kind of rounded into form just a little bit more throughout this one. And really impressive performance here that probably was their best of the year, at least from start to finish. How they were able to win, I think the biggest one is Milroe Magic. He is one of the best players, if not the best player, when he is running downhill. He is absolutely terrifying. 12 carries, 185 yards, 4 scores for the second time in a row against LSU on the ground. He was incredible. He only threw 18 passes, but was 12 for 18, 109 yards passing. It wasn't great passing the ball, and it doesn't need to be if you're running the ball that incredibly. And this is one of those guys that if he's being used this way, if he's allowed to get on the edge and allowed to make plays with his legs, that might be the very best player in America. He is absolutely a problem, and frankly, if he's rolling downhill the way that he was in this one the rest of the season, it might just be the team to beat in the SEC the rest of the way. And then the linebacker play is just remarkable. You knew that this duo coming into the season was going to be one of the best in the country, and they played good football pretty much throughout the year. There's been little blips where it hasn't been quite as clean, but Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson just won this game outright, at least for the defensive side of the ball, was just all over the place. Jahad Campbell, becoming one of my favorite players in college football, had 12 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Deontay Lawson had 7 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and an INT. They were all over the place, and they are the heart and soul of this defense, and as they have started to play better, this entire defense has started to play better, and if this is the level that you're getting the rest of the way, then this is going to be one of the better defenses in the SEC. And then you made LSU one-dimensional. This was something that LSU was always going to struggle with one way or another, but you really made them one-dimensional. They were not able to run the ball much at all in this game, and then when you're down by 25, 20 points, you're going to have to throw the ball. So you push them into a really, really tough position. It makes it so much easier for your back end that might be a little bit underhanded in certain points to sit a little bit further back, not necessarily give up that big time play, and that's exactly what they did. LSU didn't score 13 early on in this game. They scored it very late in it, and it was one of the more impressive defensive performances really of any team this entire year. It was absolutely remarkable, and really getting them to be one-dimensional, getting them to be only a pass-heavy team because they were down by so much, put you in a great position just defensively to keep everything in front of you and make sure that you win that game. So remarkable performance from this Alabama defense, and feels like everything's just kind of fallen into place for this Alabama team. But where they go from here, I mean, you're sitting really pretty. You got Mercer, you got at Oklahoma, and then Auburn to finish. 10-2 gets you into the CFP. You have wins over UGA and LSU. Possibly, depending on the tiebreaker, you could get to Atlanta. It's one of those things in the SEC that we might just have to wait one more week to fully figure out how all of this is going to flesh out, but we'll try to get into it tomorrow, try to give you guys at least a good idea of where everything sits. But another game that puts them in a really good position, and a 10-2 Alabama, just like Ole Miss and Georgia, they are getting into the field, no doubt about that, regardless of if they go to Atlanta or not. And I think if they win out, they're probably in Atlanta. Depending on the different tiebreakers, I think it works out in their favor. But regardless, we will get into that. But for LSU, a huge miss from Brian Kelly. Feels like they're heading towards another 9-3 season. Hypothetically, they still have a path to Atlanta and to the SEC title, and that would be their only path into the playoff. But they have at Florida, Vanderbilt, and OU to finish. They should be able to win all those games. Obviously, going to Florida this weekend's a little bit sketchy. Vanderbilt, always a tough matchup, but overall, they should be able to win those games. But a 9-3 season is not what LSU fans came here for. That's just the reality. They did not come to 2024 to go 9-3 again, to miss out again, and have the issues be relatively similar. Obviously, this defense has gotten a lot better. Obviously, this offense has taken a little bit of a step back. But overall, they're still looking at a very talented team, one that probably should be capable of more than this, that continues to miss the mark. So a really tough loss for LSU. Not quite as... LSU had a tougher loss than Georgia did, which makes them feel a little bit better, but it's one of those positions where it feels like Georgia is still in a place where they can make the CFP if they win out. It feels like a place where Ole Miss, if they win out, they're in. Alabama, if they win out, they're in. You're figuring out that the SEC is going to be an absolute nightmare, and the idea of 5 SEC teams making it into the CFP is not all that crazy. But we'll get into that a little bit later, and we'll take our first break here. And when we come back, we got to get into the upsets from all around the country. We had Miami go down, Iowa State, Pitt go down, and then we had Indiana absolutely escape. We'll break it all down right after this.